Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Discovery and watched the blue planet grow larger on the main screen. After 18 months of travel through the quantum tunneling system, they had finally reached Kepler 442b. The planet looked perfect from space with its blue oceans and green continents. Jake felt excited because this was humanity's first journey to another star system. Dr. Lisa Carter walked up beside him, holding her datapad. She had been studying the planet's readings for the past 3 hours. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she looked at the information flowing across her screen. The atmospheric readings showed oxygen levels that could support human life. The temperature readings looked good too. Commander Ryan Burke checked his tactical systems one more time. Everything looked peaceful around the planet. No ships or satellites showed up on their sensors. The planet seemed empty of any advanced technology. This made Jake feel more relaxed about their mission. Lieutenant Amy Foster sat at her communication station trying to pick up any radio signals from the planet. For the past hour, she had been scanning all frequencies. She found nothing that sounded like intelligent communication. The planet seemed quiet except for natural electromagnetic activity. Jake gave the order to move closer to the planet. The Discovery moved through space toward what they hoped would be humanity's first contact with alien life. The crew of 45 people felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They were about to make the most important discovery in human history. As they got closer to the planet, Amy suddenly sat up straight at her station. Her equipment was picking up something new. Strong signals were coming from the far side of the planet. The signals had patterns that could only come from intelligent beings. Jake felt his heart beat faster as he realized they were not alone. Within minutes, massive ships appeared from behind the planet. These ships were 10 times larger than the Discovery. Their hulls gleamed with a strange metal that seemed to shift colors in the light. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Ryan's tactical systems went crazy with warnings. The alien ships had weapons that made human technology look like toys from children. Energy readings showed power levels that could destroy Earth's entire space fleet. Jake knew they were completely outmatched. The alien ships surrounded the Discovery in perfect formation. Their movement was so precise that it looked like a dance. Jake realized these beings had been doing this for a very long time. They were experts at controlling space around other planets. Amy's communication board lit up with an incoming message. The signal was strong and clear. Somehow the aliens had learned human languages. When the message played, everyone on the bridge could understand every word perfectly. The voice that came through the speakers was cold and mechanical. It spoke with authority that made Jake's skin crawl. The being identified itself as War Commander Thexcool of the Zephyrian Empire. The title alone told Jake everything he needed to know about these aliens. Thexcool explained that humans had entered Zephyrian space without permission. The Kepler system belonged to the Empire along with 47 other star systems. Humanity was now subject to imperial law whether they liked it or not. The War Commander continued speaking in the same emotionless voice. The Zephyrian Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for over 2,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of different species. Some species fought back and were destroyed. Smart species surrendered quickly and were allowed to live as slaves. Jake felt anger rising in his chest as he listened to the alien's words. This creature was talking about enslaving the entire human race like it was nothing important. The casual way Thexcool spoke about destroying entire civilizations made Jake sick to his stomach. The War Commander gave humanity a choice. Earth could surrender immediately and accept slavery under the Empire. Humans would be allowed to live, but only as workers for their new masters. They would build ships and weapons for the Zephyrian war machine. Their children would be raised to serve the Empire without question. If humanity refused to surrender, the Empire would send a war fleet to Earth. This fleet would destroy every human city and military base. Any humans who survived would wish they had died instead. The Empire had done this to 38 other species who refused to surrender. Thexcool gave humanity 1 solar cycle to decide. This meant Earth had 1 year to choose between slavery and death. The War Commander seemed confident that humans would make the smart choice and surrender quickly. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. He saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. These people had traveled across the galaxy to explore new worlds and make contact with alien life. They had not come here to surrender humanity's freedom to some space empire. Jake activated the communication system and spoke directly to Thexcool. His voice was calm and steady even though his hands were shaking with anger. He told the war commander that he would carry the message back to Earth exactly as it was given. Then Jake said something that surprised everyone, including himself. He told Thexcool that humans had a serious problem. They had never learned how to surrender properly. It was not in their nature to give up when things got difficult. This might make negotiations more complicated than the Empire expected. The aliens' response came back immediately. Thexcool's voice showed amusement at Jake's words. The war commander had heard similar claims from other species before. They all said they would never surrender until the Zephyrian fleet arrived at their homeworlds. Then they all begged for mercy very quickly. Jake ended the communication and ordered his crew to prepare for immediate departure. The Discovery turned away from the beautiful planet and began its long journey back to Earth. Behind them, the Zephyrian ships watched them leave but did not follow. As they entered the quantum tunnel for home, Jake knew that everything had changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. They had found other intelligent life just as they had always hoped. Unfortunately, that life wanted to enslave or destroy them. The next year would determine whether the human race had a future among the stars, or would become another forgotten species in the Zephyrian Empire's long history of conquest. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of the UES Defiance, watching the biggest fleet humanity had ever assembled. 6 months had passed since Captain Morrison brought back news of the Zephyrian ultimatum. Every nation on Earth had worked together to build as many warships as possible in the time they had left. The human fleet numbered 230 ships. They had everything from massive battleships to small fighters. Each ship carried the hopes of 8 billion people who refused to become slaves to an alien empire. Kate felt proud of what humanity had accomplished in such a short time. Dr. Peter Hayes had spent the last 6 months working 20 hours a day in his laboratory. He and engineer Maria Lopez had pushed human technology as far as it could go. Their new weapons could punch through most known materials. Their improved shields could absorb much more damage than before. But Kate knew it would not be enough. The Zephyrian fleet that appeared at the edge of the solar system was 10 times larger than anything humanity could field. Over 2,000 alien warships moved toward Earth in perfect formation. Each ship was more advanced than the best human technology. The enemy fleet looked like a moving city as it approached the outer planets. Their ships had smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to absorb light. Energy readings from their weapons made human scientists shake their heads in disbelief. The power levels were beyond anything they thought possible. War Commander Thexcool sent a final message to Earth before the battle began. He seemed surprised that humanity had chosen to fight instead of surrendering. Most species accepted slavery when they saw the size of the Zephyrian fleet. Humans were either very brave or very stupid. The first battle took place near Jupiter. Kate led a squadron of 50 ships against the advance guard of the alien fleet. The human ships attacked with everything they had. Their new weapons lit up space with brilliant flashes of energy. For a few minutes, Kate thought they might have a chance. Several Zephyrian ships took damage from the human assault. Their shields flickered and sparked under the concentrated fire. But then the aliens began to fight back seriously. The Zephyrian weapons cut through human ships like they were made of paper. Entire vessels disappeared in balls of white fire. Kate watched in horror as ship after ship was destroyed by the alien technology. Within an hour, only 12 human ships remained from her original 50. Kate ordered a retreat toward Earth. The surviving ships limped back to the inner solar system, while the Zephyrian fleet continued its advance. The aliens did not even bother to chase them. They knew the humans could not escape. The second battle happened near Mars. Admiral Morrison had positioned 80 ships around the red planet, hoping to slow down the enemy advance. The human forces used the planet's gravity and magnetic field to help their tactics. For a while, this seemed to work better than direct assault. But the Zephyrians learned quickly from each encounter. Their tactical computers analyzed human strategies and developed counters within minutes. Soon the aliens were predicting human movements before they happened. The battle around Mars lasted 6 hours and ended with complete human defeat. As the alien fleet approached Earth, cities around the world prepared for orbital bombardment. Colonel Danny Price commanded the defense of New York from underground bunkers. His soldiers had weapons that could barely scratch Zephyrian armor. But they were determined to make the aliens pay for every block of the city. The bombardment began at sunrise over the Pacific Ocean. Beams of energy struck down from space like bolts of lightning. Entire city blocks vanished in flashes of superheated air. The sound of the explosions could be heard hundreds of miles away. Captain Beth Rogers led resistance fighters in the Australian desert. When Zephyrian ground troops landed near Sydney, her team was waiting for them. The alien soldiers were 7 feet tall with forearms and natural armor plating. Their weapons could vaporize a human being instantly. But Beth had learned something important during the first few encounters. The Zephyrians relied too much on their technology, and not enough on thinking. They followed predictable patterns and used the same tactics over and over. Smart humans could use this against them. Her fighters used hit-and-run tactics that confused the alien computers. They would attack from one direction, then disappear before the enemy could respond. When the Zephyrians sent troops to search for them, Beth's people would attack from somewhere completely different. Dr. Hayes and Maria Lopez worked frantically in their hidden laboratory trying to find weaknesses in Zephyrian technology. They had managed to capture some alien equipment during the fighting. The technology was incredibly advanced, but it had limits just like everything else. Maria discovered that Zephyrian shields worked by deflecting energy attacks away from their ships, but kinetic weapons like bullets and missiles could sometimes get through if they hit at the right angle. This information was passed to all human resistance cells immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell used this new knowledge to plan better attacks against Zephyrian positions. His soldiers began using improvised weapons made from scrap metal and explosives. These crude devices could not match alien technology, but they worked differently than anything the Zephyrians expected. The siege of Earth continued for months. Human cities were bombed into rubble, but the people refused to surrender. When the Zephyrians demanded that world leaders sign surrender documents, they were told that humanity had no leaders who could speak for the entire species. This confused the aliens greatly. Every other species they had conquered had clear leadership structures. When you defeated the leaders, the rest of the population gave up. But humans seemed to operate differently. Even when their governments were destroyed, individual humans kept fighting. Factory worker Joe Martinez organized the conversion of manufacturing plants into weapons production facilities. The equipment designed to make cars and computers was modified to produce bullets and explosives. Every day brought new supplies to the resistance fighters. Teacher Ellen Brooks set up communication networks using children as messengers. The young people could move through ruined cities without attracting as much attention as adults. They carried information between resistance cells and helped coordinate attacks. Farmer Bill Thompson developed underground supply routes that kept food and medicine flowing to the fighters. His network of tunnels and hidden stockpiles made sure the resistance could continue, even when surface transportation was impossible. After 6 months of fighting, War Commander Thexcool realized he had a serious problem. The human population was supposed to be broken and ready to surrender by now. Instead, they seemed to be getting more determined and organized. Every day brought new resistance attacks and more casualties among Zephyrian troops. The War Commander had conquered 47 different species over his long career. None of them had behaved like humans. Most species fought hard for a few weeks, then accepted their fate when they realized resistance was hopeless. Humans kept fighting even when they had no chance of winning. Kate Sullivan watched the alien fleet from her hidden command bunker deep underground. The Zephyrians controlled Earth's orbit and most of its major cities. By any reasonable measure, humanity had lost the war, but she knew something the aliens did not understand. Humans had not learned how to lose properly. They would keep fighting until every last person was dead. This was not because they were stupid or crazy. It was because freedom was more important to them than survival. Some things were worth dying for, and humanity had decided this was one of them. 2 years had passed since the Zephyrian fleet first arrived at Earth, and everything had changed. What started as a simple conquest had turned into a nightmare for the alien invaders. General Alex Turner crouched in the ruins of what used to be Chicago and smiled at the reports coming in from around the world. The humans were winning now. Not in the traditional sense because they still had no space fleet, and most of their cities lay in ruins, but they were winning in ways the Zephyrians had never experienced before. Every day brought new victories for the resistance and new problems for the occupation forces. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell had perfected the art of guerrilla warfare over the past 2 years. His fighters moved through the destroyed cities like ghosts, striking at Zephyrian patrols and supply convoys before disappearing into the rubble. The aliens had superior technology, but they could not be everywhere at once. Sam's latest operation had been his most successful yet. His team had captured an entire Zephyrian supply depot without losing a single person. The alien guards had been so focused on watching for frontal attacks that they never noticed the humans tunneling underneath their position. Engineer Tony Clark had spent months studying captured Zephyrian equipment. He learned to modify alien weapons and armor to work for human fighters. The process was dangerous because one wrong connection could cause a massive explosion. But Tony had lost his family in the first bombardment, and fear was no longer something he worried about. His workshop in the subway tunnels beneath New York had become a center of innovation. Human engineers worked alongside former college students and retired mechanics to reverse engineer alien technology. They could not match the original quality, but they could make it work well enough to kill Zephyrians. Dr. Rachel Stone had made the most important discovery of the war. She found that Zephyrian biotechnology could be reprogrammed to work against its creators. The aliens used living computers to control many of their systems. Rachel learned to introduce viruses that made these biological components malfunction. Her first success had been small, but significant. She infected a Zephyrian communication relay with a modified Earth virus. The relay began sending false information to alien commanders. 3 Zephyrian patrols ended up attacking each other because they received conflicting orders. Lieutenant Nick Davis worked in the intelligence section, trying to understand how the Zephyrian military operated. He spent his days listening to intercepted alien communications and looking for patterns. The breakthrough came when linguist Dr. Karen White joined his team. Karen had been studying Zephyrian language structures for 18 months. She realized that their military communications followed very rigid formats. Every message had to include certain code phrases and authentication sequences. This meant human intelligence officers could predict what the aliens would say before they said it. Nick used this knowledge to intercept battle plans before they were distributed to Zephyrian field commanders. Human resistance cells often knew about alien operations hours before they began. This gave them time to prepare ambushes or evacuate civilian populations. The biggest change was happening among the civilian population. People who had never held weapons before were learning to fight. Factory worker Joe Martinez had expanded his weapons production network to include hundreds of hidden facilities. Former office workers now spent their days making bullets and explosives. Teacher Ellen Brooks had trained thousands of children to serve as intelligence gatherers and message runners. The young people could move through occupied areas without attracting attention from alien patrols. They reported on Zephyrian movements and helped coordinate resistance activities across entire continents. Farmer Bill Thompson's supply network had grown into a massive underground economy. Hidden farms provided food for resistance fighters, while secret workshops produced everything from medical supplies to communication equipment. The Zephyrians controlled the surface, but humans owned the underground. War Commander Thexakul stood in his command ship, looking down at Earth, and tried to understand what had gone wrong. His forces controlled every major city and industrial center on the planet. Humans had no air force, no navy, and no space capability. By every military measure, they were completely defeated, but they would not stop fighting. Every day brought new attacks on Zephyrian positions. Supply convoys were ambushed, communication centers were sabotaged, and isolated patrols simply disappeared. The humans seemed to be getting stronger instead of weaker as the occupation continued. The war commander had requested reinforcements from the Imperial fleet 3 times. Each request had been denied because other conquered species were beginning to rebel. News of human resistance had spread throughout the Empire and inspired other slave races to fight back against their masters. Captain Chris Walker led a small team of humans who had learned to operate captured Zephyrian shuttles. They used these ships to attack alien positions from unexpected directions. The Zephyrians never expected humans to have flight capability, so their defenses were not prepared for aerial assault. Chris had been a commercial pilot before the invasion. He learned to fly alien craft by studying wreckage and experimenting with captured equipment. His first flight had nearly killed him when the Zephyrian control systems tried to reject human neural patterns. But he adapted and learned to work with the alien technology. Dr. Helen Roberts and Dr. Steve Davis had become expert xenotechnicians through 2 years of battlefield experience. They could repair and modify Zephyrian equipment faster than most aliens could. Their mobile workshops followed resistance fighters into battle and kept captured equipment operational. The psychological impact on Zephyrian troops was becoming severe. These soldiers had conquered dozens of worlds without serious resistance. They were trained to fight organized armies and defeat government structures. They had no experience dealing with an entire population that refused to accept defeat. Many Zephyrian soldiers began requesting transfers to other sectors of the Empire. They claimed that humans were insane because they would rather die than surrender. Some alien psychologists suggested that humans might have a genetic defect that prevented them from recognizing when they were beaten. Admiral Lucy Campbell had been promoted to overall commander of human resistance forces. She operated from a mobile command center that moved constantly to avoid detection. Her staff included former military officers, civilian volunteers, and captured Zephyrian equipment specialists. Lucy had realized something important about the alien mindset. The Zephyrians expected warfare to follow certain rules and patterns. When one side was clearly superior, the inferior side was supposed to surrender. This made sense for a logical military computer, but humans were not logical. Major Tim Anderson led special operations teams that specialized in psychological warfare against the occupying forces. His people would leave messages for Zephyrian troops explaining that Earth was different from other conquered worlds. They told the aliens that humans would never stop fighting no matter how long the war lasted. These messages were having an effect. Intercepted Zephyrian communications showed increasing concern among their commanders about the length of the occupation. Some aliens were beginning to suggest that humans might be too dangerous to keep as slaves. The breakthrough that changed everything happened when Dr. Frank Miller cracked the Zephyrian neural network protocols. He discovered that alien command systems were all connected through quantum communication links. Information flowed instantly between ships and ground bases across the entire solar system. Frank realized that this connectivity was both the aliens' greatest strength and their most vulnerable weakness. If humans could access the network, they might be able to turn Zephyrian technology against itself. The project would require unprecedented cooperation between all human resistance cells. The plan was called Operation Mindbreak, and it required perfect timing across multiple continents. Every major resistance group would launch coordinated cyber attacks against Zephyrian networks at exactly the same moment. The goal was to overload their systems with false information and conflicting orders. General Turner gave the go signal at midnight Greenwich Mean Time on the second anniversary of the invasion. Around the world, human hackers and engineers activated devices they had been building for months. Modified alien communication equipment began flooding Zephyrian networks with garbage data. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Zephyrian ships began attacking each other as their identification systems failed. Ground forces received orders to retreat and advance at the same time. Supply convoys were redirected to empty coordinates while ammunition depots were told to self-destruct. For 6 hours, the Zephyrian occupation force was completely paralyzed by the chaos in their communication networks. Human fighters used this opportunity to launch massive coordinated attacks against alien positions. When the sun rose over Earth, the balance of power had shifted for the first time since the invasion began. War Commander Thexakul watched his carefully organized military machine tear itself apart, and finally understood what he was really fighting. These humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something new and dangerous that could adapt faster than his computers could calculate countermeasures. 5 years had passed since the first Zephyrian ships appeared at Earth, and the galaxy was no longer the same place. Captain Chris Walker stood on the bridge of the UES Phantom watching alien space unfold before him. His ship was completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors thanks to technology that had not existed when the war began. The Phantom was humanity's first deep space stealth vessel. It had been built using a combination of human engineering and captured Zephyrian technology. Dr. Helen Roberts and Dr. Steve Davis had spent 3 years figuring out how to make the two systems work together. The result was something neither species could have created alone. Chris and his crew were 50 light-years from Earth on the most dangerous mission in human history. They were going to strike at the heart of the Zephyrian Empire itself. Intelligence reports suggested that the alien capital world was poorly defended because most of their fleet was busy fighting rebellions across the galaxy. The rebellions had started 2 years earlier, when other conquered species learned about human resistance tactics. The Vortai were the first to rise up against their Zephyrian masters. Their leader, Commander Velthara, had studied translated copies of human military manuals that resistance operatives had smuggled to them. Now 17 different species were fighting for freedom from the Empire. The Zephyrian military was stretched thin across hundreds of star systems trying to maintain control. They no longer had enough ships to properly occupy any single world, including Earth. On Earth itself, the war had transformed into something completely different. Admiral Lucy Campbell commanded a military force that bore no resemblance to the desperate resistance fighters of 5 years earlier. Human soldiers now used weapons and equipment that were superior to most Zephyrian technology. The key to this transformation had been humanity's ability to adapt and improve captured alien technology. While the Zephyrians followed rigid design principles that had not changed in centuries, humans constantly modified and upgraded everything they touched. Each generation of human weapons was better than the last. Major Tim Anderson led special operations units that could infiltrate any Zephyrian installation. His soldiers wore captured alien armor that had been modified with human electronics. They carried weapons that combined the best features of both technologies. Most importantly, they thought in ways that alien computers could not predict. The psychological impact of the long war had changed both species. Zephyrian troops who had once been confident conquerors now feared assignment to Earth sector. Stories of human fighters who refused to die had spread throughout the alien military. Some Zephyrian soldiers claimed that humans were supernatural beings who could not be killed. On the human side, an entire generation had grown up during the war. These young people knew nothing except fighting against alien occupation. They had been trained from childhood to think tactically and to see opportunity in every situation. They were perhaps the most dangerous fighters in galactic history. Dr. Frank Miller had expanded his cyber warfare capabilities far beyond the original Operation Mindbreak. His teams could now penetrate Zephyrian networks at will and manipulate their systems without detection. They regularly fed false information to alien commanders and redirected supply shipments to human-controlled areas. The Zephyrian Empire was discovering that their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. Their interconnected command structure allowed information to flow quickly across vast distances, but it also meant that a single breach could compromise their entire network. Human hackers were exploiting this vulnerability on a daily basis. As the Phantom approached the Zephyrian capital system, Chris received reports from resistance cells across the galaxy. The news was encouraging. Zephyrian forces were retreating from dozens of worlds as local populations rose up against them. The empire that had seemed invincible 5 years earlier was collapsing from within. The capital world of Zephyr Prime appeared on the Phantom's sensors as a massive city covering an entire continent. The planet's population was over 20 billion aliens who had never known anything except victory and expansion. They were about to learn what defeat felt like. Chris's mission was not to destroy the planet, but to capture the central command complex that controlled the entire Zephyrian fleet. Intelligence reports indicated that the facility was defended by only a few thousand troops. Most of the Empire's military was fighting rebellions elsewhere in the galaxy. The Phantom landed in a remote area of Zephyr Prime without being detected. Chris led a team of 30 specialists toward the command complex using equipment that made them invisible to alien sensors. They had studied the facility's layout for months and knew exactly where to go. The attack began at sunrise Zephyr Prime time. Human commandos struck simultaneously at 12 different entry points around the massive complex. Their weapons cut through Zephyrian defenses like they were made of paper. Within minutes, they controlled the outer perimeter of the facility. The Zephyrians inside the complex were completely unprepared for assault. They had never been attacked on their home world before. Their defensive procedures were designed to repel invasion fleets, not small teams of infiltrators. The human commandos moved through the facility like they owned it. Dr. Roberts and Dr. Davis led the technical team that captured the main computer center. They plugged their equipment directly into the Zephyrian command network and began downloading strategic information. Within hours, they had complete details about every Zephyrian military operation in the galaxy. But the most important discovery was how weak the Empire had become. 17 major rebellions were draining their resources faster than they could replace them. Over half of their fleet was engaged in putting down uprisings that grew stronger every day. The Empire was dying from within, Commander. Velthara of the Vortai Rebellion received the captured intelligence data within hours of its transmission from Zephyr Prime. She immediately shared it with other resistance leaders across the galaxy. For the first time, the scattered rebellions could coordinate their attacks. Against specific Zephyrian weaknesses, the coordinated assault began exactly 1 week after the capture of Zephyr Prime. 17 different species launched simultaneous attacks against Zephyrian forces in their sectors. The alien military found itself fighting on dozens of fronts at the same time with inadequate resources. On Earth, General Turner launched the largest human offensive since the war began. His forces attacked every major Zephyrian position simultaneously. The aliens no longer had enough troops to defend their installations properly. One by one, their bases fell to human assault teams. War Commander Thexcool watched his empire crumble from his flagship orbiting Earth. He had received reports of defeats from across the galaxy. Species that had been slaves for centuries were throwing off their chains and driving out Zephyrian occupiers. The rebellion had become a revolution. The final blow came when his own fleet began to turn against itself. Human cyber warriors had infected the Zephyrian command network so thoroughly that ships could no longer trust their orders. Some vessels received commands to attack their own allies. Others were told to retreat when they should advance. Thexcool realized that his military machine had been turned into a weapon against itself. Every advantage the Empire had possessed was now working in favor of their enemies. Their communication networks spread confusion instead of orders. Their automated systems attacked Zephyrian positions instead of defending them. The war commander made a decision that no Zephyrian leader had ever made before. He opened a direct communication channel to Admiral Campbell on Earth and requested immediate negotiations. The word surrender was not used, but everyone understood what was happening. Admiral Campbell received the message in her command bunker deep beneath the ruins of Washington, D.C. Around her, human officers who had been fighting for 5 years tried to understand that victory was finally within reach. The species that never surrendered was about to win its first interstellar war. But Campbell was already thinking beyond victory. The galaxy contained hundreds of species and thousands of worlds. If the Zephyrian Empire collapsed completely, the resulting chaos could destroy entire civilizations. Humanity needed to help build something better to replace the empire they had helped destroy. Captain Walker and his team, prepared to return to Earth with the most complete intelligence data ever captured from an alien civilization. They had learned everything about Zephyrian technology, military tactics, and political structure. This information would help humanity transition from fighting a war to building a lasting peace. As the Phantom began its journey home, Chris looked back at Zephyr Prime and wondered what would happen next. Humanity had proven that they could never be conquered. Now they would have to prove that they could be trusted with victory. The hardest part of the war might be what came after it ended. 8 years had passed since War Commander Thexcool first gave humanity the choice between slavery and death. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Victory watching the largest fleet in galactic history approach the Zephyrian homeworld. This fleet was different from any that had come before because half the ships were crewed by former Zephyrian slaves. The Victory herself was a symbol of how much everything had changed. She had been built using the hull of a captured Zephyrian battleship, but her weapons and systems were purely human design. Captain Beth Rogers commanded the ship with a crew that included humans, Vortai, Kellan refugees, and even some Zephyrians who had defected from the Empire. Beth looked older than her 45 years. 8 years of constant warfare had left scars on her face and gray in her hair, but her eyes still burned with the determination that had kept humanity fighting, when surrender seemed like the only rational choice. She had never learned to quit, and never would. The fleet approaching Zephyr Prime contained over 3,000 ships from 19 different species. Each vessel carried beings who had refused to accept slavery under the Empire. They had learned from humanity that some things were worth dying for, and freedom was the most important thing of all. War Commander Thexcool watched the approaching fleet from his command ship and knew that this would be the final battle of the war. His remaining forces numbered less than 500 ships. Most of his experienced commanders had been killed or captured during the rebellions. The crews of his remaining vessels were young and inexperienced, but Thexcool was not ready to surrender yet. He had spent his entire career conquering other species and building the empire. If he was going to die, he would take as many enemies with him as possible. He gave orders for his fleet to prepare for a final desperate assault. The battle began when Zephyrian ships launched a massive attack against the center of the Allied fleet. Their weapons lit up space with beams of energy that could vaporize entire ships. For a few minutes it looked like the old empire might win one last victory through superior firepower. But the Allied fleet was ready for this attack. Admiral Morrison had studied Zephyrian tactics for 8 years. He knew exactly how they would fight, and had prepared countermeasures for every possible strategy. The human ships moved aside to let the enemy attack pass through empty space. Commander Lisa Hayes led a boarding party against the Zephyrian flagship. Her team used tactics that had been developed during years of guerrilla warfare on Earth. They moved through the alien ship in ways that no military computer could predict. Within an hour they had captured the bridge and taken Thexcool prisoner. The war commander found himself face to face with beings he had tried to exterminate 8 years earlier. He expected them to kill him immediately as revenge for the billions who had died during the war. Instead, Admiral Morrison asked him a simple question that changed everything. Morrison wanted to know why the Zephyrian Empire had never tried to negotiate with humanity instead of demanding immediate surrender. Thexcool explained that negotiation was a sign of weakness. Strong species took what they wanted while weak species submitted or died. This was the natural order of the galaxy. Morrison shook his head and smiled. He told Thexcool that humans had tried to negotiate from the beginning. Captain Morrison himself had been willing to discuss terms when they first met at Kepler 442b. The Zephyrians had refused to consider any option except complete surrender. The war commander began to understand that he had made a fundamental error in judgment. He had assumed that all species thought like Zephyrians. He never considered that humans might have different values and priorities. This mistake had cost him an empire and billions of lives. With their leadership captured, the remaining Zephyrian ships began surrendering one by one. Most of their crews were young soldiers who had no desire to die for an empire that was already dead. They laid down their weapons and asked for mercy from the species they had tried to enslave. Admiral Morrison faced the same decision that Thexcool had made 8 years earlier. He could order the destruction of the remaining Zephyrian fleet and eliminate any future threat to galactic peace. Or he could show mercy to a defeated enemy and try to build something better than what had come before. The choice was easy for Morrison. Humans had not fought this war to become conquerors themselves. They had fought to prove that free peoples could defend themselves against any threat. Now they had to prove they could be trusted with victory. Morrison announced that all Zephyrian personnel who surrendered would be treated as prisoners of war according to human standards. They would not be enslaved or executed. Those who wanted to return to their home worlds would be allowed to do so. Those who wanted to help build a new galactic government would be welcomed as equals. The news of the final battle spread across the galaxy within hours. Species that had been slaves for centuries suddenly found themselves free. Some celebrated while others struggled to understand what freedom meant after generations of servitude. The galaxy was about to change in ways no one could predict. Captain Amy Foster had survived 8 years of war to become one of humanity's senior diplomatic officers. She was assigned to work with former Zephyrian territories to help them establish independent governments. The process was complicated because many species had forgotten how to make decisions for themselves. The Vortai were the most successful at building their own civilization. Commander Velthara became the first elected leader of the Vortai Republic. Her people had learned human concepts of democracy and individual rights during their rebellion against the Empire. They adapted these ideas to fit their own culture and values. Other species struggled more with the transition to freedom. The Kellen had been slaves for over 1,000 years. They had no memory of independent government or individual choice. Human advisors worked patiently to help them learn how to make decisions as free people. Dr. Frank Miller and his team faced the massive task of dismantling the Zephyrian command network. The system had controlled billions of people across hundreds of worlds. Shutting it down too quickly could cause chaos while leaving it. Operational too long risked another attempt at empire. The solution was to gradually transfer control of each system to local governments as they were established. Human technicians worked alongside former Zephyrian engineers to modify the network into a communication system that served the people instead of controlling them. 20 years later, the galaxy had become a place that no one from the old empire would recognize. The Galactic Confederation included over 200 independent species who had chosen to work together as equals. There were no slaves and no masters, only free peoples cooperating for mutual benefit. Captain Amy Foster, now an elderly admiral, completed her memoirs in her retirement home overlooking the rebuilt city of Washington, D.C. She wrote about the species that had never learned to surrender and how their stubbornness had changed the galaxy forever. The final words of her book became famous throughout the Confederation. She wrote that the Zephyrians had tried to break humanity, but they did not understand something important about human nature. Humans do not break when pressure is applied to them. They adapt, they endure, and they never give up fighting for what they believe is right. The lesson had spread to every species in the galaxy. When someone tries to make you choose between slavery and death, there is always a third option. You can choose to fight for freedom no matter how impossible victory seems. Sometimes the species that refuses to surrender can change the entire universe. War Commander Thexcool spent his final years in comfortable retirement on a human colony world. He had been given the choice between execution and exile. He chose exile and used his remaining time to study human history and culture. He wanted to understand the species that had defeated his empire. In his own memoirs, Thexcool wrote that the Zephyrians had made their greatest mistake when they assumed all species were like themselves. Humans were not logical in the way that aliens understood logic. They would choose death over slavery even when slavery would let them survive. This made them dangerous in ways that no military computer could calculate. They could not be conquered because they did not know how to accept conquest. They could not be broken because they did not understand that they were supposed to break. They were the species that never surrendered, and they had taught the galaxy what that really meant. The Galactic Confederation grew stronger every year as more species joined as free members. The old empire was remembered only as a historical lesson about what happened when one group tried to dominate all others. The future belonged to those who believed in cooperation instead of conquest. Humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors, but as liberators. They had proven that some species could never be enslaved because they valued freedom more than life itself. This was their gift to the galaxy, and it would endure long after the last human had returned to dust.